Abuse of words has been the great instrument of sophistry and chicanery, of party, faction, and division of society. John Adams. Good evening, everybody. Sorry I didn't do a stream last night. You'll kind of know why in a bit. So let me move on to that right now. Starting on I should probably put 16 months here. Starting on September 22nd, I added a PayPal.me here. First video of the month, which is today, the first video of the month, because I didn't do one yesterday. I'm going to just disclose how much I've gotten so far from that. Bitcoin, Vertcoin, so far $0 as far as I checked, but I might as well go ahead and check now. And you can easily just do Bitcoin Explorer and Blockchain Explorer, that works. And you put in the address, BTC, and you can see that this is the donations. I've not received any. This is from me, from my Patreon, and then that I closed, and then this is giving it to Susie Dawson when she needed it. And then here's Vertcoin. Just type in Vertcoin Explorer. Sometimes you could just go ahead and put the address down. That would work. And then you'll see that, oh, there's no transactions because nothing is ever transacted on it. Anyways, that is that. The reason why I do that is because super chat, I know people have donated and I'm going to see my thank yous. And Google or YouTube takes a big chunk. PayPal takes a big chunk too, but not as big as YouTube. And as far as the channel monetization, here's where you can see this is all that's been given. Started with Ronnie Foshi, $5 back in April 12th, 2019. Yuya Namoto on April 13th. Port from Co-op multiple times. August 9th, August 13th, August 15th, August 31st. Mayar in the Panhandle, August 12th. Eagle Plane Anchor, August 26th and September 26th. I just want to say thank you for everyone that supports me this way. I don't I ask, but I don't expect. I just keep going as much as I can. Someone in the past, The Fly, told me that information should be free, and thus that's what I'm doing. And for as far as PayPal, since September 22nd to the 30th, it's been $200 from MC. That's just abbreviations I use, but Maya Miara, I think that's you. Thank you so much. I just wish there were more of you, 200 of you. That way each 200 of you could just give me $1 and just make it a lot easier. Okay. Now the reason why I did a lot of, and I'm getting rid of that background. I've just been reading and listening and trying to piece some things together, in which I think I'll have it ready by tomorrow night. I hope so. I think I may have to do a live stream tomorrow, actually. So we'll see. So there's an audiobook of Michael Sugrue, the professor, which you've listened to, the one regarding not Heraclitus. What did I do a video on? Give me a second. Sometimes too many videos. Sometimes too little time, I guess. All right, let's go to and the thing is, monetization from YouTube sucks. You can see the live is usually off, limited, ineligible. Some of it's on, but I'd say like a tenth to a quarter of my videos are monetized without any limitization or just plain off or ineligible. Okay, Professor Michael Sugrue, I did one on Marcus Aurelius Meditations. Yeah, it was a very good one. So this one is part one of an audiobook, 6 hours long. Then there's another one that's another 6 hours long. What I'm actually going to do is I'm going to play this part, but after I play one from Tom Richey, which he looks like Matt Damon. I could listen to this guy talk all day just because it just makes me laugh whenever I look at him. It's like, hey, that's Matt Damon. I bet he gets that all the time. But it's a good one. And same thing with Michael Sugrue, where he's kind of going over Protagoras of the dialogues by Plato. And I mean, you got to listen to 12 hours of his stuff. Very good. And what I do want to do is play as the last part of his, which is an hour and a half, but I won't do it on this one. I'll do it after. So I'm going to take down this live stream and do a live stream separate about this one. And then I can move on to Protagoras, which is hopefully I will do, if not tonight, tomorrow, maybe tomorrow morning or an afternoon. Yeah, today's Thursday. Is today Thursday? No, today's Wednesday. Yeah, today's Wednesday. Okay, I have time. I could do that on Thursday night on Protagoras. It's going to be great. And then on Friday, hopefully I have enough pieced together where I can at least start. And go over everything as far as what's led everything to today, where we've got the people like Heraclitus always searching for the truth, and having Socrates in the same way with Plato, how we go about it. And then you've got those who are sophists that just, well, you're going to know about the sophists today. And so where are we today? We've got the small number of people who are searching for the truth. No matter, we're looking everywhere. There's no place where we won't look. It's pretty bad in some remarks. It's like, we need to know. Not necessarily we don't really need to know, but it's nice to know. And then most of us don't care. Most of us want to succeed, and most of us will be in the materialistic of how we want to know and how we want to get things and stuff like that. But has that led down to where we are today? And aside from that, you've got the many, the few, and you've got the in-between that want to control what's there. And that would be kind of the mystery schools. And it started, if not, as far as we know, it might have started with Pythagoras. Or at least it propagated in quite a interesting way. And that we'll get into tomorrow. Anyways, the Sophists. I'll go ahead and play the parts that I want to play. And all of this, of course, is in the YouTube description box and also on the vim.tv or Steemit description box. Hopefully DLive and other platforms have description boxes, but oh well. Here we go, and I'll see you guys in a bit, all right?
And now let's talk about philosophy. All right, this is what we're going to get into now. We're going to talk about philosophy. Now, philosophy comes from two Greek words, philia and sophia. All right, and for those of you who don't read English very well, I've also got it in Greek. Now, philia, sophia, which means the love of wisdom. Philosophy is the love of wisdom. Now, what kind of love are we talking about?
Wisdom.
No. The Greeks had many definitions for love. When love is used in the Bible, we have one word for love in the English language. What? Go ahead. I don't know if she said the right thing. Appreciation. That's not what I was looking for. So I did hear that. Those are not the droids I was looking for. But anyway. Now, what kind of love? The Greeks had several words for love. I would say, I love my students. I love my daughter. I love my wife. I love my parents. Okay, you prefer, but it's different types of preference. The Greeks had a word, agape, which a lot of times when love is in the Bible, it's agape. It is this unconditional love, describing a love that God has for people, and if somebody is going to love in a Christ-like manner, they would exercise this sort of love. This is a very selfless sort of love. Then there is eros, that's where we get the word erotic. That is romantic love. So there is a word for romantic love. And then there is philia, filial love. Anybody? Philadelphia. Brotherly love. So when you think about this, the Greeks are clarifying the kind of love for wisdom. This isn't, I want to take wisdom out on a date, buy it dinner, take to a movie, try to make out with it or something like that, hug and kiss wisdom. This isn't the kind of love that it's talking about. This is more wisdom is my buddy, okay? We want to go out and watch the ball game or something like that. That wisdom is my friend. I'm friends with it, all right? We follow each other on Twitter or whatever. That's the sort of thing. That's the sort of love that we're talking about, is brotherly love, that I love wisdom like a brother. And that is what philosophy is. Now, one thing that I hope we get to, we may or may not, it's kind of at the end of the course, but the Hagia Sophia, this is kind of getting toward the Middle Ages and the Byzantine period. This was the church of holy wisdom. So what does Sophia mean? Sophia means wisdom. So philia Sophia, the love of wisdom. Hagia Sophia, meaning holy wisdom. All right, so when you take these terms, Sophia is wisdom. A philosopher. If philosophy is the love of wisdom, what is a philosopher? That's right. One who loves wisdom. A philosopher is one who loves wisdom. Now, let's go ahead and take a look at this. A sophist. What does this mean? If a philosopher is a lover of wisdom, are you okay? Are you okay? Okay. Oh, well, let me know if you need a nurse pass or something like that. A sophist. What is a sophist? If a philosopher is a lover of wisdom, what is a sophist? Huh? Full of wisdom, or a wise person, one who is wise, a sophist. Now, we have a word for that is like this, okay? We have a word for this. Sophisticated. Now, in what context would we use the word sophisticated? How would you be describing that? For what kind of person? What? So someone sophisticated be mature. And what? Put together. Anybody else? Sophisticated? Fancy. Okay, sophisticated meaning fancy. Now, in the rural South especially, I would think that there are people that you might have heard use this term in a derogatory sense. Have you ever heard sophisticated used as an insult? Ricky, help me out here.
It's like you're really cocky about being smart, and so they would just use it to insult you. They're like, oh, you're so sophisticated.
Okay, so someone who's sophisticated could be somebody who is cultivated and civilized and educated and all that, or it could be somebody who's pretentious, somebody who is acting as if they're smarter than they actually are. I've had some students who are very sophisticated in the sense that, yeah, this person is very smart, very cultivated and all that kind of stuff, but every once in a while there's a student who comes in and I expect by their demeanor that they are really, really smart. And then I start grading their tests and their essays and all that kind of stuff, and they're not quite as sophisticated as they act. It's more of a persona that they put on. So sometimes you're describing somebody who's just really pretentious. Y'all know both types of sophisticated people, right? You've met people that you would describe as sophisticated as a compliment, and some people you might describe as sophisticated as an insult. You know, some pretentious person that puts on a cardigan to talk about philosophy or something like that. That person could be described as sophisticated, you know, wearing glasses when they don't even need them or something like that. No, these actually I have a prescription. It's kind of light, but I do see rain better when I put these on. So, anyway, a sophist, one who is wise. And what we want to think of is wisdom without the love is what a sophist is. Okay, somebody who is wise but doesn't necessarily love wisdom. Okay, that's the difference between a philosopher and a sophist. One has love, one doesn't. Yes. Sure. If we could get the window closed over there real quick so that we can be a little more comfortable. Justin, if you wouldn't mind closing that window behind you, I would be grateful. Implied permission to leave your seat, of course. All right. So we'll get that. Let me know what I can do to make the classroom more comfortable at all times. Now, how can I tell if someone's a sophist? I've got a system here by which, if you are wondering whether someone's a sophist, we can tell by the 3 R's, all right, the 3 R's of the sophist. And I made these up. I'm really proud of myself for this, okay? I'm feeling very sophisticated right now. Relativism, rhetoric, and recompense. Relativism, rhetoric, and recompense. What is recompense? Do we know what that means? There is a root in there, and there's a picture clue. What is the root? What is the stem that you can see in there, or whatever we would call it?
Does that have anything to do with Wait, is that a compass or a clock?
That's... Which is funny, because that's actually, you know what? That's the root, same root. Comp. What does that mean? When we say comp, I'm going to comp you for this.
No.
You've never used this? You will as an adult. You can get comp time, or you can get if you get compensated. This is short for compensated. So if I were to, sometimes what they do is, right now teachers are doing those after-school conferences with parents, and what Mr. Roberts might do is comp us for a teacher workday or something like that. He may say, we're going to excuse this teacher workday because the teachers have stayed after school. Well, compromise, compass. So, but one of the things I'm thinking about comp in terms of compensation. But yeah, that root is used quite a bit. So that's very. Caroline, you have come up with quite a few of these already. This says great teamwork, but it wasn't teamwork. You did that by yourself. Okay, but anyway, there we go. Now, relativism, rhetoric, and recompense. Now, let's talk about these things. Now, first of all, it's relativism, perspective, all right? If you're going to be a sophist, then you are looking at the world as this world is how I perceive it, all right? There are a few different ways to look at truth. Now, the relativist really would personify this idea that perception is reality. And this is where we go back to the fundamental question, what is reality? What is real? What is true? All right? Jesus said to Pontius Pilate, I come here to testify to the truth. Pontius Pilate's like, what is truth? All right? What is that? Do we even know what it is? That sort of thing. There are a lot of people who have a relativistic view. If you look at this little cartoon here, 1 plus 1 equals y. 1 plus 1 equals x. Do you believe that you're right? Being right is not necessarily about what is right objectively, but it is about what I can persuade people, what I believe, and what I can get you to believe is right. Truth. 2 types of ways of looking at truth. We can look at objective truth or relative truth. Now, I'm going to illustrate this to y'all, okay? Objective versus relative truth. Now, objective truth is treated like an object, okay? Let's look at this family getting some dinner together, all right? It's kind of a light meal or something like that. Better watch that beverage if you're just eating salad. But anyway, if we look here, objective truth, that is always a salad. That is always a bowl. Those are always carrots, tomatoes, plates, objects. That is a bowl to me, and it is a bowl to you. That is a carrot to me, that is a carrot to you. All right? It never changes. That our job is to discover. If we look at truth that way, our objective would be to discover truth. Now, where do we usually hear the word relative more than anywhere else? Family. All right? There's a reason for that. Because if we look at this from the little girl's perspective, that is mom.
Pretty sure.
Wow. Okay. Does she believe, as long as she believes that that's her mom and dad? Okay, very, very good. That was a very sophist sort of move. All right. Now, mom, dad, Now, the thing is, I could describe myself as a dad. But when it comes down to it, am I a dad?
Yeah.
You're not my dad.
Well, I'm not your dad. I'm not your dad. Right? I'm not your dad or your dad or your dad. I'm actually not anybody's dad in here. Although I would describe myself as a dad, when it comes back down to it, I'm only a dad to one person. There are 7 billion or so people in this world. And one person calls me dad.
I get it.
You get it. What?
Because, like, to us, to be dad isn't true, but to Caroline, your Caroline, it is true.
Yes, to my Caroline, it is true. Okay? And that's the thing. So with my Caroline, it is true that I am her dad, but I'm only a dad to one person. All right? And my wife is only a mom to one person. Now, the thing is, when Caroline and I come home, let's say that I get home with Caroline, we walk in the house. Wife. Now, to her, mom. To him, wife. All right? So, and the thing is, it's like my wife is a wife, but she is only a wife to one person. She is only a mother to one person. But the dad sees something completely different than the little girl. All right, do you see what I'm saying here? That your relatives, they're called that because that's who they are relative to you. So that's where you get into that whole thing. It's like, well, are you a dad? Well, from this person's perspective, you were a dad. So let's think about looking at truth in the same sort of way. Anybody read 1984 yet?
No.
No. All right. If you haven't read 1984, you might. I think that's at least an optional. Are there any upperclassmen you know that are reading that for a class? What?
Sister read it last year.
Okay, did she have to? Was it required? Okay, so y'all will read it at some point. You want me to give you a quick preview? Y'all probably would like that, right? Get
Is that
something.
the one with Big Brother and all?
Big Brother is watching you. That is correct. That is 1984. Now, the thing is that in this book, Winston is living in this totalitarian state. The main character, the protagonist, is in a totalitarian state. Big Brother is watching you. Now, the thing is, there's one of the big debates in the book. Now, it's also, which Richey was quoting the Rage Against the Machine song where this is, who controls the present controls the past. Who controls the past controls the future. If you can redefine the past and say what has happened and determine what people's values are, then you can determine the future. Or who controls the past controls the future. Who controls the present controls the past. All right? So by controlling the present, you can control the past, and by proxy control the future, because you can use mind control. You can convince people, you can persuade people that your way is correct. 2 plus 2 equals what?
X. 4.
Well, see, there's the thing. I've used rhetoric here. All right? I have already just said, like, look, 2 plus 2 equals X, and because I told you that, that's what it is. And so, even though some teacher before, 2 plus 2 equals 4, 2 plus 2 equals 4, right? But y'all see it there, 2 plus 2 equals X. Okay, very good. Now, I'd probably have to try a little harder than that, but maybe if I could persuade you. Now, here's objective truth. It is what it is. 2 plus 2 equals 4. All right? Because it is. I take 2 objects, I add 2 more objects, it's always going to be 4 every time. And that's one of the big debates in this book, that Winston is insistent that 2 plus 2 equals 4. Now, but what if? What if it is only 4 because we believe it to be? So if I said 2 plus 2 equals 5. Hey, pretty good, huh? I'm going to see how it looks on the camera. Let's see. 2 plus 2 equals 5. All right. Now, if I could do this well enough, maybe I could persuade you to that. And if you all came around to believing that 2 plus 2 equals 5, would 2 plus 2 still be 4? No. Why not? We believe it's 5. Relative truth. The truth is whatever we believe it to be. The truth is what is going to be most convenient for us. Now, when you think about this, did you see some relativism in what you read? Which we'll talk about more next time. The clouds. Okay? You want to go to the Phaltery to learn? For knowledge or for power? We'll talk about that next time. Let's hold off on that. Now, the thing is, if truth is objective, what is my objective? If truth is objective, what do I want to do when it comes to truth?
Make people believe.
Huh?
Make people believe.
Well, or I need to find out what it is. Okay? Truth is this wallet. I lost my wallet. I don't have it. What do I need to do?
Find it.
Find it. Okay, I need to look for it. So if I believe in objective truth, my job as a lover of wisdom, right? Lover of wisdom, I'm looking for truth. Oh! Found it. Okay? Now, facepalm, huh? That bad. All right. Now, but if I am a relativist, oh, okay, I've got my wallet. It's in my pocket. What? As long as I believe it's in my pocket, and as long as I can persuade you that it's in my pocket, then that's it. I get pulled over, and a police officer says license and registration. I mean, think about we've got some guys in here. A lot of the guys are gone for whatever reason, but Jedi mind trick. It's just these are not the droids you're looking for. And, oh, these aren't the droids we're looking for. And that becomes truth to that person. All right? And I could say, my wallet is in my pocket. That is truth. That becomes truth because we believe it. Now, if that is my concept of truth, then what is my objective? Basically what you just said a little while ago. If truth is whatever people believe it to be, and there is a version of the truth that is most convenient for me, then what? If truth is whatever I believe it to be, would I want to believe what is most convenient or least convenient for me to believe? Most convenient. And what would I want you to believe? What I believe. I not only want me to believe what is most convenient for me, but I want you to believe what's most convenient for me. Now, if I'm going to go around telling people 2 + 2 = 5, I'm going to have to do a little better than that, right? Okay, I have not persuaded you, Megan? 2 + 2 = 5. Okay, not persuaded. I need to do better. So therefore, if I want to be a sophist, then I need to study rhetoric, which is the art of public speaking. That people who can speak very well, who can put arguments together that sound really good and persuade people, and people think, whoa, that was an argument. I have nothing to say to that. This person is such a good speaker. There have probably been times, if you ever heard somebody speak, and you think, this person, wow, they're making a lot of sense. But then later on, you look at what they said, and you think about it, and you realize it didn't make a lot of sense. That this person really just hoodwinked you. Y'all ever been in that situation? Yeah. Or has there ever been a situation where you've heard a speech delivered, but you read the text, and the speech wasn't nearly as impressive as this person made it out to be? Think, Richey, what are you talking about? We don't read. But anyway, public speaking. If you want to persuade people, then you need to be a good speaker. And you need to learn the power of persuasion. And persuasion is not just about what you say, but how you say it. Pathos, logos, ethos. These are 3 things that we use in order to persuade people of things, okay? And our objective here is power, and specifically power over others, power to promote the version of the truth that best suits us. Because if truth is relative, do I need to seek it? No, I need to determine what's best for me. I need to believe that, and I need to make you believe that. Sophistry. This is a word that has entered the English language. And this word, you'll probably encounter this at some point or another. A sophistry is a subtle, tricky, superficially plausible, but generally fallacious method of reasoning, or a false argument, a sophism. So what's happening here is a sophist is not trying to win you over on the evidence, not really using logos as much, or if they're using logos, they're using false logic, or logical fallacies. One of the things you'll study, you might have studied them already. Has anybody encountered some of those things like straw man, ad hominem, some of these logical fallacies that people use? When you take AP English later on, you'll learn some of these logical fallacies. Now, the thing is that this is something that sounds good, but the reasoning is off. And that's what we call a sophistry, that someone is acting as a sophist. Now, Plato wrote that a sophist is like a fisherman. Now, Jesus, when he met some of his apostles, he said, I think to Peter and maybe Peter and Andrew or something like that, or Andrew and okay? And well, I think there were two of them. He said, come with me, I will make you fishers of men. Now, Jesus isn't talking about necessarily manipulating people, but when you think about this, Plato says that a sophist is just like a fisherman because they are both trying to catch something. That a sophist is a type of fisher of men because they've got their argument and you're out there swimming free in the water, and the sophist puts that out there and he tries to put the hook through your mouth and to reel you in. That is a sophist objective. Now, there are fishermen that make money. They're professional fishermen, right? There are people that make good money off of that. And they get sponsors and all that kind of stuff. Just the same way, there are professional speakers. There are people who are very good speakers, and they can make themselves heard. All right? And so when we look at this, would this be something that you would pay for? If you needed to be able to persuade people, would you pay somebody to teach you to do it? Yeah. All right. You think about Law and Order SVU or something like that. Does it help them be persuasive speakers? Yes. And especially if you're going to be an attorney or something like that, or be in a profession where you have to be persuasive, then you need to learn this art, and you would pay for it. So recompense. This person is paid to teach. So that is the third thing. Relativism, rhetoric, and recompense. That this person has a view of truth that is relative and moving and changes. This person has a knowledge of rhetoric, how to speak, and this person gets paid to teach. Those are the three things that make someone a sophist. Caroline? We are a first 15, last 15 school. Yeah, that clock is intentionally behind to keep people from packing. Is it an emergency? Is it okay? If it's not okay, you can go. We've actually got, we just kind of crossed over, but the bell's a little bit late. Is it okay? Okay. All right, so anyway, recompense, paid to teach. Now, the big three, Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. Now, when you read Plato's writing, Socrates is always depicted as somebody who is not a sophist. That Plato had a bone to pick with the sophist. Plato had a different view of truth than the sophist. Plato viewed truth as objective. He viewed truth as something to be sought. Now, since you already read Aristophanes, or should have, is Socrates depicted as a sophist in that play? Think about it when you finish reading it, okay? Go back, look at it again, because I think now that you've got some context, this could work a little better. I shouldn't have given you all that yet. I usually give it after this lecture. Mea culpa, mea maxima culpa, okay? So take another look at this and look at it with Socrates in the eyes of Aristophanes, a sophist. So Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle, the big three of Athenian philosophy, and they were against the sophists. Now, one exception, that while Socrates and Plato did not believe in studying rhetoric, they believed that rhetoric was beneath them. Because the thing is, they wanted to study reason. They believed that if you can make good enough arguments, then you don't need rhetoric, because your logic should convince people. Now, Aristotle is thinking more in terms of like, wait, if I was saying 2 plus 2 equals 4, and there was another person who was like, hey, 2 plus 2 equals 5, and they start doing magic tricks and light show, and they said Richey's an idiot or something like that. And you say, yeah, he kind of is an idiot. Look at him. All that sophistry and all that kind of stuff. If the other person was a better speaker, would the crowd believe the good point or the bad point? They would believe the good point. They would believe if the person making the bad point is a better speaker. Think about this. President Obama, Mitt Romney. Who's a better speaker?
Obama.
President Obama. President Obama, John McCain. Anybody remember John McCain? John McCain, who wants to be president of the United States, and my hands are like this, and I'm very old, and I talk in a voice that does not really inspire or motivate people. Now, was this somebody people wanted to vote for? No. Who was the better speaker, President Obama or John McCain? President Obama. All right, there are a lot of people who talk about, oh, the Republican Party's got this big crisis. They need to look at their issue positions and all that kind of stuff. People don't care. All right? Nobody cares about, well, there are some people that care about the issues, but their mind's made up already. The people who are undecided voters, a lot of them make their judgment primarily on what candidate is the better speaker. Mitt Romney actually pulled ahead of President Obama after the first debate for a little bit. Why? Because President Obama was really tired. Like President Obama was doing this sort of thing. And he just seemed exhausted and he didn't perform well. Mitt Romney looked very rested, presidential, all that kind of stuff. Now, President Obama then blew Mitt Romney out of the water in another debate, and people kind of changed their mind after that. Like, oh, President Obama is a good speaker. Okay, he'd make a good president. I can vote for him again. But really, when it comes down to it, whoever, if you look at who becomes president, almost every time it is the person who is more photogenic, telegenic, rhetorogenic, or however you would say somebody that's a good speaker. That Ronald Reagan was really old, but he was a great speaker. They called him the great communicator. So the oldest president we've ever had, but he was such a great speaker and he always had the right lines to say and all of that kind of stuff. They asked Ronald Reagan, what about people who are concerned about your age? What do you say to them? And he was at a debate and his opponent was over there. And Ronald Reagan said, I'm not going to make age an issue in this campaign. I promise that I will say nothing of my opponent's youth and inexperience. And it was like, oh, nobody mentioned his age again. It was just he had those zingers that Reagan was just always ready. And because he was a great communicator, he got elected. He knew how to communicate with the American people. And then President Obama, after Benjamin Netanyahu's speech to Congress, President Obama came out and gave a short talk to the press. And he said two things. He said, Prime Minister Netanyahu didn't say anything new, and he didn't present any alternatives. Now, I was talking to students the other day in AP Government, and sure enough, what did one of my students say in AP Government? Yeah, Prime Minister Netanyahu spoke to Congress, but he didn't say anything new, and he didn't offer any alternatives. Do you think that student watched Prime Minister Netanyahu's speech? What did he listen to? He listened not specifically to President Obama, but what President Obama wanted said. The reason why President Obama came out and said that is he wanted that to be in the media. President Obama came out and said, didn't say anything new, didn't present any alternatives. End of story. Now, are most people going to actually watch Prime Minister Netanyahu's speech? No, they will listen to whatever the media says. And President Obama has been very good about that he's an amazing speaker and he knows how to get talking points out there to the media. So Aristotle says, look, if you are a Republican, do you want to nominate a candidate who's not a good speaker but has great logic and positions on the issues? No. You want to nominate somebody who what? Is a good speaker. Because whether you have true opinions or not, or you have logic on your side, if you are not a good speaker, the crowd will not believe you. And keep in mind, the backdrop here is Athenian democracy, where you have the crowd involved in government. So the thing is, let's contrast briefly the Sophists and the Platonists, all right? The people who followed this Sophist model and the followers of Plato and Socrates. So first of all, for a Sophist, truth is relative. A Platonist, truth is objective. Now, when we look at truth, it all starts with the way that we look at truth. Because if truth is relative, why do we want to learn? We want to learn rhetoric so that we can persuade people. Now, if you believe truth is objective, you want to learn reason. Because you want to learn how to reason with people and use logic. But that is not the goal of the Sophist. The Sophist's goal is to persuade somebody. Now, the Platonists, to convince or to be convinced. Now, this is one of those nuances. Like persuade and convince, we use those for the same purpose. a lot of times. But what's the nuance? What's the difference between persuading someone, trying to persuade someone, and trying to convince someone? Emily, any ideas? Persuade versus convince. None at all? Trent? Persuade. What does it mean we're trying to persuade?
Try to make them believe.
Okay, we're trying to make them believe like us. In this case, we're trying to convince someone that what we're saying is true. So persuasive, pathos, logos, or ethos? All right, we still got some time. We've got about 8 minutes left, so we shouldn't see closed notebooks or anything like that. Persuasive speaking, largely about pathos. When you hear somebody start talking about the children, we need to help the children. Pathos, persuasive, that sort of thing, right? Now, convince. I'm using more what? Pathos, logos, ethos. Okay, typically logos. And I'm dealing with logic. So that's the thing, that when you're convincing, you're a little bit more open-minded as well. If somebody's trying to be persuasive, are they open-minded? Not at all. Not open-minded at all. So here, persuading versus convincing. And your end game, sophist, knowledge or power? Power. Whereas the Platonists believe that knowledge is an end of itself. That Socrates didn't really have any power, but he thought that, you know what, since I know, then that's fine, as long as I know myself. And we'll talk. I can't wait to talk about Socrates. It's going to be so exciting. All right, so anyway, I believe that puts us at the end of that. Does everybody have this? Now, when you take another look at the clouds, I want you to ask yourself, in the eyes of Aristophanes, and I want you to answer question 5, which I hadn't given y'all for homework. But keep in mind that everything's for homework now. Everything's on the table. And we could be quizzed. I'll take up your homework sheet, all of that. But your question, the big question, was Socrates a sophist in the eyes of Aristophanes? Now keep in mind, what's the point of view here? Aristophanes is just a playwright writing about Socrates. The Socrates we see here, is it the real Socrates or a fictional character? Well, we'll decide that, okay? So y'all read it and ask yourselves, was Socrates a sophist? And with that, that wraps that up. Thank y'all very much, and hopefully we've got a little bit.
Okay, hopefully those who aren't familiar with sophism, you guys can understand it a little bit better. I mean, he teaches, I think, high school, so heck, if you haven't grasped it from a high school lesson, I don't know what to do. We're going to go to a little bit more of a detailed one, which is Professor Sugrue, who does a good job of his lecture. Now, before I go on, you can get the full text of Sugrue's thing here. You can see all of his stuff and here, and then again, everything's in the description box. You can actually read the dialogues of Plato. You can find different translations of it, but I just have one that's, you can get a link. It's free. It's Dialogues of Plato, translated by Benjamin Jowett. And you could also get different types of, but anyways, I'm going to go ahead and play this part. It might be about less than an hour, and then I'm going to end the live stream. I should probably make sure I've got something on. Oh, my Zoom just went out. What's going on here? Where's my camera? I think my camera got overheated. Yeah. Well, that's what that sound was for. Well, I'll have to take a break. Anyways, the main point of it is to have dialogues with each other. If we want to convince or be convinced or find out the truth, find out what's going on, we do have to come and talk with each other. And that's why I have this open forum thing, so anyone who wants to talk can talk. We don't have to find, we don't have to discover anything. We can just talk. But you know, a lot of this is just geared on, all right, this is the topic. Let's talk about it. Not just have these people who are talking heads talk about it and you watch them. And that's what the mainstream media is there for. That's why you've got all these people who go on those shows and everyone involved in them making millions and millions of dollars. And we're just the ones why do we want to listen to the ones who are making money off of us and controlling us? And to understand that, you have to understand what being a sophist is and how it relates to what it is today. I mean, if you think of rhetoric, who are probably the best rhetoricians, I guess you could say, if that's even a word. Most people say lawyers and politicians. How ask any individual, how many people like lawyers? How many people like politicians? All right. I'm going to go ahead and play this part, listen for it, and then we'll talk afterwards. All right.
The Protagoras is one of the most humorous and interesting of the dialogues written in Plato's early period. It forms a sort of transition along with the Gorgias into the great dialogues of Plato's middle period. And in terms of its form, it's clearly a sort of comedy which leads to an acrasia, or not to an acrasia, but to an aporia, which is a sort of an impasse. We don't ultimately get the conclusion we were hoping to get at the end of the discussion. We reach a series of dead ends. And although the progress of the dialogue doesn't take us all the way to the unity of virtue and to a full knowledge of virtue, it does undermine some of the sophistic attempts to create a pluralized version of virtue, and also it gives us some very fine vignettes and insights into the sophists themselves. Protagoras is the main sophist, who is Socrates' main interlocutor in the course of this dialogue. But also with him, visiting at the same house of Callias, is Hippias and Protagoras, two other minor sophists. So we're going to get a look at the sophists in action, and in this case, a group of sophists that are all together, engaging in, if not a common pursuit of knowledge, a simultaneous pursuit of appearing knowledge, or the appearance of knowledge. The Protagoras is remarkable for its juggling of several different themes simultaneously. The first big theme that clearly comes through is the connection between pleasure and virtue. Towards the end of the dialogue, there's a discussion of acrasia, which is the technical term for weakness of the will. And Socrates and Protagoras try and find out if there is such a thing as weakness of the will, and how that connects with hedonism as a doctrine. Hedonism is the idea that pleasure is the good. In addition to the connection between pleasure and virtue, there's also a kind of combat, a kind of dialectical interaction between rhetoric on the one hand, which is what the sophists do for a living, they make long speeches, and dialectic, which is Socrates' main way of investigating any question. So the Socratic kind of education based upon dialectic and the sophistic kind of education based upon rhetoric are compared and contrasted, and in the long run, or in the short run, because it's not a very long dialogue, the Socratic kind of dialectical education wins out. In addition to that, simultaneous with these two themes, there's a conflict or a sort of contrast between logos and mythos, between reasoned, rational discourse and figurative discourse, poetic discourse. We're going to find out towards the end that although Protagoras wants to make a distinction between the earlier poets like Homer and Simonides and Hesiod and himself, the modern, and his ilk, the modern sophists, it's going to turn out that there's a considerable similarity, there's a considerable overlap between the ancient poets and the mythos that they generate and the kind of speeches that the sophists generate. In other words, the sophists and the poets are closely connected both intellectually and morally. Finally, the last of the big themes that's offered to us in this dialogue is the conflict between unity and plurality. In other words, Socrates and Plato represent a sort of intellectual drive towards unity. They want one of everything. They want to take the multifarious many, all the various parts of some giant whole, and unify them, and in this unity find some sort of conceptual coherence. Now, opposed to this drive towards unity is Protagoras himself. Protagoras is not represented very favorably in this dialogue, and he seems to come off as rather vain, rather mercenary, a very murky kind of a thinker, the sort of a thinker that thrives in ambiguity, that thrives in the twilight, half dark, half light area, where no one really knows what they're going on. His eyes are attuned to seeing in the dark. And his favorite kind of discourse is a sort of relativistic discourse which does not demand extreme precision the way Socrates does. He likes long speeches as opposed to Socrates' kind of dialectical interchange where we examine sentence by sentence, word by word, line by line. This ambiguity that he gets from long speeches is what Protagoras thrives upon. He also likes poetic imagery. If he has a choice between presenting a logos, a reasoned discourse, and a myth that he invents on the spot or perhaps has a collection of them in his memory, he always goes with the mythos. He finds it more pleasurable and also more advantageous. It's very hard to get hold of an antagonist that's producing a myth. And Protagoras knows that he's not going to take too much criticism about a myth itself, because myths are notoriously protean. They tend to move around. They don't give us something clear and definite to fix our thinking on. In some ways, you could say that Protagoras is the advocate of myth, and poetry is his favorite discipline, and Socrates is the advocate of mathematics, because it gives you that pure, crystalline, definite thing to think about. And so in some ways, it's a fight between the advocate of pure reasoning and the advocate of imagination, the advocate of murkiness or ambiguity. Now, this murkiness or ambiguity makes itself immediately apparent if we think about what Protagoras is famous for, not just in this dialogue, but in Greek culture as a whole. He's the one that coined the term, or the phrase, man is the measure of all things. And what that means is that all things, all thinking, and all being are absolutely relative to the knowing subject. So you may think that 2 and 2 is 4, and someone else may think that it's 5, and well, for you it's 4, and for him it's 5, and whatever other answer we get from somebody else, that's true for them too. And what it does is, it's not limited, of course, to mathematics. It's also questions of taste. You may think a painting is beautiful. Someone else may think it's ugly. Well, both things are true. The problem is he takes this relativity, this absolute relativity, and extends it throughout the entire realm of discourse, even to things like mathematics or knowledge or logic. What this does, the result of this drive towards infinite plurality, right, is that language breaks down altogether. We end up talking to ourselves, because you may have one language and you may be meaning one set of things with the words you use, but I'm using words that may seem similar and may not, depends on who we ask, right? It'll change from person to person, and you really can't compare my language to yours. What this does is put into our thinking a sort of centrifugal force that atomizes all of us, and we all end up becoming solipsists. We all end up talking to ourselves because there's no coherence between these absolutely relative nodes of judgment. What Socrates is trying to do is force Protagoras away from that extreme relativism, which in some respects is perhaps built right into the sophistic position itself, not just to Protagoras. What Socrates is trying to do is create a sort of conceptual drive towards unity which makes real communication possible. And the only way that real communication will be possible is if we share, at least in part, perhaps in whole, but certainly in part, a common language, a common set of meanings for our words. So that means that man isn't the measure of all things, and 2 and 2 really is 4. And if you think it's 3, it's not that you're right and I'm right, you're wrong. The only way that it's possible for anybody to be true, to be right, or to make a true affirmative statement, is if it is possible for people to be mistaken. If there is just your opinion and my opinion and the next person's opinion, what we end up with is the impossibility of anybody making mistakes. And if you can't make any mistakes, there's also no need for any teachers, because there's nothing to teach anybody, because whatever they think right now is right, and if the teacher gets them to think something else, well, then that'll be right too. So there's no change, no gain. So Protagorean relativism actually ends discourse altogether. It atomizes us and tends to tear social and moral and political bonds apart, and also ultimately logical bonds. For Socrates, one will be overlaid on the other. So this is what Socrates has in mind when he comes to see the great Protagoras. He intends to go to him directly and say, what is it you teach? What is it you know? And how is it you'll improve my young friend by having him study with you? He's going to give you money. What does he get from you? This is going to be the upshot of his argument. Now, one other thing we should notice before we look at the details of the argument itself. When you are reading the dialogues, it would be a good idea to look back at the symposium when you look at this dialogue. The reason why is that almost all the speakers in the symposium are here. Right? It's held in the house of Callias, and there are 12 or 15 young men there, plus the 3 sophists, and all of the important speakers, Agathon and Pausanias, from the symposium will be here. Also, when you're reading this dialogue, you should look at the Gorgias, because many of the same themes that are presented in the Protagoras are covered from a different angle in the Gorgias itself. So those are the two dialogues you should connect with it. Let's think how it starts. First thing that happens in the dialogue is Socrates begins narrating his interchange with Gorgias and the other sophists to an anonymous friend in the marketplace, and he narrates the dialogue just after it's happened. Socrates has just left engaging in this encounter with Protagoras and the other sophists, and he says, this morning, first thing, Hippocrates came to my house before sunrise and woke me up and said, Socrates, get up, we have to go see Protagoras, he's in town, and he's a famous thinker, a famous sophist, a great intellectual, and for that reason, the promising young men of town want to go see him, want to go listen to his conversation. They'll pay him what it takes so that they can become wise and cultured. And Socrates has a much better nature than I do. One of his students woke up at 5 o'clock in the morning before sunrise, and he said, okay. He wasn't upset or anything. He went out and said, look, we can't go to see Protagoras and these other gentlemen at this hour of the morning. The sun isn't even up. It's not a decent hour. Let us walk around Athens until the sun comes up, and we'll have a conversation, we'll have a philosophical discussion, and the result of this will be that we can show up at a decent hour, and that's much more appropriate for us. Now, this is very important. Now, usually when we read one of the dialogues, we flip through these frame scenes, these first 2 or 3 pages of the dialogues, but in this case, it's very important. There's a lot of symbolic stuff going on. First off, I have been telling you all through my lectures on the dialogues that Socrates is the new Odysseus, and that there's a journey motif that goes through all of the dialogues. When Socrates walks around after taking the hemlock, when Socrates says, down I went to Piraeus. Well, here's the beginning of the Protagoras, and what are we going to do before we go there? We're going to walk around the city. We're on the journey again, and this is the journey of dialectic. It is also an image, an icon of real teaching. Socrates and this young man Hippocrates are engaging the dialectic back and forth, asking themselves the question, what do you learn from a sophist? What is it the sophists know that other people don't, that makes them worthy of their hire? Suggests to us that, first of all, real teaching is done through the dialectic. Real teaching is free. Socrates doesn't charge to educate this young man. That's the contrast that we're going to come up with. In other words, we're going to get an image of Socratic teaching first. Now, immediately after that, we're going to go and talk to Protagoras. We're going to see the other alternative kind of teaching. So they walk around the city until the sun comes up. And of course, you know what the sun means. We did the Republic yesterday, right? All of these images, all of these symbols move through the dialogue. The sun is the good. And as we have the sun going up, we're moving from darkness to light. Figure it out. Right? So there's a tremendous amount of symbolic stuff going on in that first scene. And by the time it's a decent hour, it's 6 or 7 o'clock in the morning, Hippocrates and Socrates go to Callias' house, and they're stopped by a eunuch doorkeeper. This is one of the great funny scenes in Socratic philosophy or in Platonic philosophy. The eunuch doesn't like sophists. And we got a house full of sophists here, and they're all talking and talking and talking, and they don't listen to each other, and they make long speeches, and they're a pain in the neck. The servants of the house don't like it, and in particular, sophists are viewed as being disreputable, corrupt and corrupting men. So when Socrates and Hippocrates come to the door, the eunuch has one look at them. He's really surly and unpleasant and slams the door in their face. Said, no, sophists, we don't want any. We don't have any room for you. We have plenty of sophists here. Closes the door on them. The idea here is this, because Socrates says explicitly to this eunuch, we are not sophists. We have come to see Protagoras. Do let us in. He does get let in. Key thing here is this, though. The demos of Athens, the people that killed Socrates in the Apology and in the trial and death of Socrates, they think that Socrates is a sophist. They can't tell the difference between Socrates' improving kind of discourse and the corrupting discourse of the sophists. Well, the eunuch, like the people of Athens, because they can't tell the difference between Socrates and a sophist, are missing something important. Right? Either testicles or philosophy. But the idea is that the demos of Athens are philosophical eunuchs. Right? They can't see the real eros for knowledge that is characteristic of Socrates. They don't appreciate it. So this scene is very carefully crafted. It's only a page, but it shows Plato at his best. I mean, it's caustic if you read it properly, and if not, you just turn the page. But anytime that you attempted to turn the page in a Platonic dialogue, you're not picking up what they're driving at. Go back and have another look at it. So we get by the eunuch that guards the gates of hell, and now we go directly again to an analogy, or to a scene, to an idea stolen directly from the Odyssey, Book 11. Those of you who know Homer know that Odysseus goes down to Hades, right, and sees the spirits of the departed and the heroic and kind of monstrous figures that are down there. Well, as soon as the door opens and Socrates and Hippocrates are admitted in, we have a replication of the kind of rhetoric that's used in that part of the Odyssey, Book 11. Socrates is the new Odysseus, and he's going down to hell. He's going down to Hades to see the monstrous shades that live down there. And Hades is full of sophists. Right? Think of the irony. I mean, it's in some ways like the Divine Comedy, right? I mean, we're going down to hell to see these great evil men, but they're still alive, but in a sense they never really were alive because their souls are dead. So we go down and visit the dead souls. I'm right about this journey motif, and this is the new Odyssey. Down we go to Hades, and we're going to find out at the end of it, when Socrates wins the argument and moves on, that Socratic rhetoric, the dialectic, the real way towards truth, is what leads us out of Hades. It's what lets us out of hell. The true pursuit of knowledge makes us blessed and divine. All right, so he goes into and out of hell. So here we're going to have a little comedy in hell. And hell is full of sophists. All right, once you pick up on that, you begin to realize that there's going to be a lot of witty interchange here, and all these people are slightly daemonic. We're going to have three sophists, and it's going to be like a three-ring circus. We're going to have one great one who will contradict himself all the time and say mushy, murky, ambiguous things. Why? Because this is the best he can do. He thinks this is clarity, or better still, there's no clarity to have, so mushiness and ambiguity is the best we're ever going to get. In addition, he's going to have two other sophists, Protagoras and Hippias there. And Protagoras and Hippias will be constantly parodying themselves. In other words, Plato is a great wit, and this is a true exercise in high comedy. Protagoras is well known for his ability to make fine distinctions between equal and equivalent, between happiness and joy, between certainty and sureness. In other words, he's great. He would have made a great lawyer in the sense that he can make non-distinctions between words. That's what Protagoras does all the time. The few times that Protagoras is going to talk in this dialogue, he's going to say, do you mean equal or equivalent? We should listen to both impartially, but not identically. In other words, that's what he's going to be doing, parodying himself all the time. Hippias, the other alternative, the other sophist, he's going to make the kind of standard distinction between nomos and phusis, but after listening to Socrates speak, or actually, after Socrates finishes speaking, Hippias will say, you know, that was a wonderful discussion, Socrates. I have something to say about that poem as well. The point there will be that Socrates' speech was absurd, and Hippias wasn't listening to it. He was preparing his own speech. That's one of the great drawbacks of this rhetorical matching of long speeches. When your opponent is talking for an hour or so, you're not listening to him. There's no communication going on. What you're really doing is thinking about what you're going to say. Well, Socrates has just gone through an elaborate lampoon of one of the kind of rhetoric that the sophists produce. And he makes all these ridiculous, absurd propositions. And at the end of it, Hippias says, you know, that was a highly meritorious discourse. I have a few things to say on that. And then Alcibiades comes and just cuts him off and said, later, you know, some other time we'll listen to you. Please continue the discussion. The idea here is that the sophists parody themselves. We have the great communicators of Greece who are unable to communicate with each other and constantly contradicting themselves. This is what hell is like in the Socratic sense. I mean, they're not afraid of torture and terrible damnation. They're afraid of people that don't listen to each other. That's what hell is going to be like for Socrates. All right? So the great journey into hell, and he comes away unscathed because he is pure of heart. All right. So the initial scene, they get in the door, they come in, and Socrates and Hippocrates are admitted in, and they come up to the great Protagoras, and everyone makes way for him because he's a gray eminence. He's an old man. He's venerable. People think of him as being a very intelligent fellow, one of the great thinkers of Greece. And Socrates comes up to him and says, look, my friend, the young man, Hippocrates here, would like to study with you, but I've got some questions. Or actually, I have some questions I've been wondering about. We were talking about this before. First off, what do you do? I mean, in other words, they talk to you, and what do they get from you? What art do you teach? And in addition, what is the utility of this art? In other words, what's it for? Why should they know whatever it is that you can teach? How can you improve them? And Protagoras says, very ironically, I like the way you put questions, Socrates. I like answering a good questioner. And see the end of the dialogue when the good questioner takes him out. It says he's not going to like that at all. He's going to get very balky and petulant the way all the sophists do when they're under the gun dialectically. So in response to Socrates' very direct and blunt questions, Protagoras gives a speech in praise of himself. It's called an encomium. And he says, I'm a very wise man, and I'm like other wise men in the sense that I'm very virtuous. And prior to the modern age, when a man could honestly call himself a sophist, we had other teachers who were wise men who were able to educate youth, but they called themselves poets. In the ancient days, people like Homer and Hesiod and Simonides, hid behind poetry as a sort of stalking horse for the fact that they were sophists. In the olden days, before people became sophisticated and cosmopolitan, they thought sophistry was a bad thing, but not now. Now I don't have to pretend to be a poet. Now I can admit directly that I'm a sophist and an educator. Now this will be ironic because in the next speech he's going to create an elaborate myth. The point will be that in fact the poets and the sophists are really the same sort of people. People that thrive on verbal and intellectual ambiguity to fool ignorant people into doing their bidding. So he analogizes himself first of all to Homer, the great teacher of Greece, and Hesiod and Simonides. So he has an enormously exalted opinion of himself. And when he's asked how he can improve Hippocrates, he says, each day that Hippocrates comes and studies with me and listens to my conversation, he will become a little bit better. And day after day, each day he'll be just a little bit better than the day before. Thank you. Now, that is a totally ambiguous, useless explanation. In other words, better in what way? In what respect will he be benefited? You can't say that he gets a little bit better every day and have that be a meaningful answer. Well, that's the best Protagoras can do. Remember that ambiguity is what he thrives on. That's his strong point. So Socrates bores in. He refines the question and says, look, precisely and specifically, what is it that you teach, to whom, and what is the benefit? And so after a little back and forward and a little hemming and hawing, Protagoras says, I teach politics and good citizenship. He teaches political virtue. Socrates says, political virtue, that's great. I mean, you said the magic word, virtue. Now, I mean, Socrates has got you, but it'll take a while for the argument to develop. He says, political virtue, well, here's my problem. Ironically, Socrates says, I've been worried about that political virtue, I suspect that it's impossible to teach. Here's the reason why I suspect that political virtue may be impossible to teach. Number one, it doesn't seem to be any kind of techne, any kind of an art, any kind of a logos or craft. Here's the reason why. Here in Athens, we have a democratic city. And when the government wants to build a ship, they go to the shipwrights and ask them, can we build this ship and how much will it cost? They get some technical specialist. When they want to build a wall or a temple, they go to the masons and they go to the architects and say, can we build this thing and how much will it cost? And the reason why they go to the specialist is because it's a specialized kind of knowledge. It's a techne or an art. But he says, when we want to decide what laws are wholesome, what laws are just, what laws are a good idea, we ask the butcher, the baker, the candlestick maker, we ask everybody. So that must mean that there must be no techne to constructing good laws. There must be no kind of knowledge analogous to shipbuilding or masonry which allow us to create a just society or good legislation. So that's my first reason, he says, for suspecting that it's just impossible to teach political virtue because nobody knows what it is. We can't find a specialist in it. That's number one. Number two, he says, if you notice the sons of great politicians, well, great politicians must have this political knowledge, this political excellence that you talk about, but their sons are usually useless. They don't teach them anything. The sons of Pericles weren't good for much. And since that's the case, well, the question arises, if the great politicians won't teach it to their sons, who will they teach it to? And if they're not willing to teach it to anybody, then perhaps they don't know it. Perhaps they do it by luck or art or divine dispensation. Well, that's the first big interchange between the two. Now notice first off, Protagoras, when first encountered by Socrates, gave a speech in praise of himself. That's the rhetorical, sophistic component. Socrates then engages him in the dialectic back and forth until we find out where the argument is going. We have this dialectic. The whole dialogue is organized like that. There's a constant dialectic. First we get a speech, and then we get a series of dialectic interchanges. And then we get a speech, and then we get dialectic interchanges, and then we get a speech, and then we get dialectic interchanges. It happens 3 times. So the whole dialogue itself is one big dialectic. And in between the second and third sets of speeches and dialectic, we get an impasse, which is worked out between the two. In other words, it's a fight not just between Socrates and Protagoras, but it's an argument between these two styles of discourse and these two kinds of thinking. That's what it has in common with the Gorgias. 2 different ways of thinking and talking are being contrasted here. And as in the case of the other Platonic dialogues, the dialectic emerges victorious. Because at least then we know what we're talking about. We move from the realm of darkness to the realm of light. We can precisely analyze what's going on. And Socrates' commitment to communication and to the clear articulation of ideas emerges triumphant. What remains to be shown is that Protagoras himself is not committed to that. He's just committed to making a few dollars. Socrates never contradicts himself in the dialogues, or very rarely, unless he's doing so intentionally. Protagoras does it several times in the course of this dialogue. Like the Euthydemus, will find that the sophist believes one thing and also simultaneously believes another. He's not a unified, integrated soul. Right? He believes a number of different things. Now, faced with this challenge from Socrates that political virtue may not be teachable, Protagoras says, well, would you like me to give a logos or a mythos? In other words, how would you like me to respond to that? Do you want a clear dialectical argument? Because I can do that. I mean, I'm an experienced speaker. I can speak in every style. Or would you like a really nice story? And of course, since we have people out there other than Socrates, they decide, we'd like a really nice story. Whichever turns you on, whichever you really like, that would be fine. So tell us a story, granddad, because he's an old man, a gray eminence. And he says, you know what? That'd be fine, because I like telling stories. So they're all sitting in a circle, and Protagoras gives two myths. Now, remember, though, he just, at the beginning of his discussion, praised himself because, unlike Homer and Hesiod, he can admit that he's a sophist and not try and hide behind poetry. And what does he do the first time that he's called, to put up or shut up? He invents some clever story that he describes as pleasant. It'd be more pleasant for me to tell you a story than these difficult questions and answers. That's rather hard. You've got to do a lot of thinking to do that, whereas this comes real naturally to him. So he gives two myths. The first is the myth of Euthydemus, Prometheus and his brother, and that's where all the various virtues or capacities like claws and teeth and speed and quickness of running are given to the animals, and there's none left over for man. So Prometheus has to steal the fire of the gods, right? And that's where that's where human beings as natural entities come from. He then creates a second myth, saying, well, just with fire and the things that they get from Prometheus, human beings can't form cities and can't form justice. And so Hermes, a kind of separate creation, after human beings are running around with the animals holding on to the divine fire, then Hermes and Zeus decide to send down justice and plant it in every human heart. Isn't that an edifying story? Well, it's really not edifying. The point of it is this. The sophists thrive on the distinction between nomos and phusis. Phusis is the Greek word for nature. Things that exist naturally, like the law of gravity, are contrasted with things that exist conventionally, like laws against parking and no parking zones. Well, they think that all of law, including laws against murder or theft or rape, any of the great evils, they're also conventional, arbitrary, not to be taken especially seriously. Well, by creating two myths, one to cover phusis and one to cover nomos, Protagoras is really gesturing at that. And Socrates is much too quick to miss that. He knows exactly what Protagoras is doing. And Protagoras has an idea, but it's the usual hazy, murky, ambiguous, messy stuff that goes on in Protagoras' mind and in his rhetoric. So Socrates says, well, look, that's all very interesting, and that's a very nice kind of a speech, but there are problems with it. And Protagoras says, well, look, before we engage in that, because he'd like to avoid getting involved in the dialectic again, he says, look, this is why your Athens is run the way it is, because the reason why democracy makes sense is because everyone has a little bit of this divine justice from Zeus and Hermes in them, and at the same time, there's a separate creation myth for our relationship to nature. The point here is that Protagoras is not an Athenian. All right? He's a foreigner, and he moves from city to city, all right? And he's a relativist with regard to language and to logic and to morals, because man is the measure of all things. As Plato showed in the Republic, politics is ethics writ large. Because he has a relativistic ethics, he also has a relativistic political theory. So he shows up at Athens and invents some handy-dandy speech and some great myth to explain why the Athenian method of government is a really good one. On the other hand, if he went to an oligarchic city or to a city run under a monarchy, he could invent some myth to explain why that's really good too. They're all good. If you Athenians like democracy, well, then I can give you some myths and it'll tell you what a great thing democracy is. If you have a revolution and an oligarchy takes over, I'll invent some new myths, or I'll tinker with the old myths and I'll explain to you why that's really good too. In other words, man is the measure of all things, and here we are in Athens, so democracy is really great. Now you, Socrates, are a malcontent, right? I can legitimize anything by inventing some cute story. You don't seem to be able to legitimize any government because you're not happy with any of them. So you're a problem, Socrates, whereas me, I've only been here a day, and I already think Athens is just great. And when I go to the next city with a different kind of government, I think that's great too, because man is the measure of all things. And you think this, and he thinks that. It's all a question of taste and opinion. And my myth can smooth over the apparent distinctions in logic, or not just apparent, the real distinctions in logic, and make anything seem plausible and legitimate. Well, Socrates goes after him and says, look, I need to know, I want to engage with the dialectic. I'm not especially interested in your myths here. And here's what I've been wondering about. Virtue. Okay, you've been wondering about this all your life, Socrates, but in this particular case, he asks Protagoras, are the virtues a unity or are they a plurality? Now, it's a sucker question, because you know that Protagoras thinks everything is a plurality. So no matter what you ask him, he's going to say, well, there's a little bit of this and a little bit of that, and it seems this way to him and it seems that way to him, and there's a little bit over there, and maybe it'll change, maybe it won't. In other words, he thrives on ambiguity, and he thrives on plurality, on diversity. You could say that he really celebrates diversity. As a matter of fact, he celebrates nothing else. There's no drive towards logical unity or coherence in him, whereas Socrates is exactly the opposite force. From many, one, e pluribus unum, right? You think that there are lots of virtues? Well, aren't they all really the same thing? Knowledge, something along those lines. So, at first, Protagoras gives mushy, murky answers. In other words, he won't give a direct yes or no. Is it a unity or is it a plurality? He doesn't like that yes and no kind of thing. Well, he says they have certain vague similarities, but also they have certain differences too. And he says, you know, I mean, in a way he's balancing on the tightrope. You want me to give it, you know, the different spin? You want me to make it the same? I mean, I can do either, and I don't have any definite fixed opinion about that in any case. So they begin to discuss, and Socrates begins to press, and he says, do you really want to stick by the idea that the virtues are a plurality, not a unity? He makes an argument about the function of virtue. Isn't it all? Aren't they all the virtues, for example, courage or justice or wisdom? Aren't they all opposed to folly? And if they're all opposed to one thing, folly, aren't they really all the opposite of folly, whatever that one thing is? That's going to turn out to be wisdom or knowledge later on. But if they all have a consistent opposition, then don't they all have one kind of unifying foundation? Now, Protagoras is backing off. He doesn't want to get tangled in with Socrates because he sees that he's a very dangerous man in dialectic. So Protagoras begins to bristle and begins to kind of become petulant the way all the sophists do when they get on the losing end of an argument, and then communication breaks down. He withdraws and he says, look, I want to give long speeches. So he starts to give a long speech, and of course the crowd praises him again, as they always do in these dialogues. And he says, well, some things are good for animals, some for plants, some for some people, some for others. For the sick, some things are good. For the healthy, other things are good. For the young, for the old, for the rich, for the poor, and complete plurality of virtue. And Socrates says, look, I want to engage in the dialectic with you. And as he puts it so ironically, I can't remember long speeches. Now, of course, Socrates forgets nothing, right? He has a completely focused memory. Everyone else may forget what's going on, and that's the point of these kind of long speeches. The sophists use words the way squids use ink, right? They throw them into the atmosphere, and then no one can see anything, and no one knows what we're talking about anymore. And that sounds like a great speech, so everyone claps at the end of it, even if they don't understand it. Socrates is the only one that doesn't clap because he understands it and says, that's not an answer to my question. And Protagoras says, well, look, I don't want to answer this kind of question, back and forth. It's really hard to do. So communication breaks down. The sophist on the one side is withdrawing from the dialectic. He wants to go towards rhetoric. Socrates ironically says, I can't remember things like that. Now remember when we did the Meno, all knowledge is but recollection. When you're reading the dialogues, whenever you see remembering or forgetting, underline it, because it always has some symbolic meaning. It always means either knowledge or ignorance. And when Socrates says, I'm ignorant, or I forget speeches, I don't have a good memory for them, what he's really saying is that this doesn't lead us to any kind of knowledge, and I'm ignorant of this kind of business. Well, this little interlude, this impasse, allows the sophists to kind of parody themselves. Protagoras starts making elaborate verbal distinctions which get us nowhere, do not advance the argument in any respect. Hippias says, gentlemen, and he gives a sort of set speech, Athens by nature is a great place, it's a center of learning. It's unseemly for you men to part without really resolving this discussion. And the other listeners try and create some sort of relativistic compromise. In other words, how about if Protagoras gives long speeches and Socrates asks short questions? Well, that doesn't make any sense. It's the stupidest thing you could imagine. These men who are trying to create some compromise don't understand that the dialectic has its own laws. These laws are not established by convention. Real reasoning, serious point-by-point thinking has its own logical principles internally. They are not established by having a vote on them. They would be that way whether you liked them or not. So Socrates is standing around while these guys decide if they can't come up with some useful construction of the dialectic. And he's thinking, the dialectic is far bigger than you. It is prior to you. And you have to bend your knee to it. It doesn't have to adjust itself to your predilections. But they don't quite understand that. So they managed to bring Protagoras back in because, strangely enough, Alcibiades, one of the great evil men, or one of the great seducers of the Athenian people, is a friend of Socrates in this dialogue and shames Protagoras into coming back into the argument. He says, look, let him admit that he doesn't know how to engage in dialectic if that's what Protagoras wants to do and pull out. Socrates admits that he can't match him in long speeches. So if they want to say, you're the king of this, I'm the king of that, that's fine. But Protagoras has too big a head to admit that. Once it's put in those terms that he can't meet Socrates on the level ground of dialectic, then his pride brings him back in. He's read too much Homer. Right? So back we go in. He's going to do something heroic and win a great victory here. So we go right back into the argument, but they give the serve, it's like tennis, they give the serve to Protagoras. They say, okay, old man, you can ask Socrates as many questions as you want, starting from the beginning. And then after you finish asking questions, then you're expected to answer them. So, Protagoras, he doesn't want to talk about math, he doesn't want to talk about the unity of the virtues, he doesn't want to talk about any of that jazz. He says, I have an idea. Let's talk about virtue, but my way. Socrates, do you know the following passage from Simonides, the great poet, one of the guys he discussed in the beginning? And Protagoras gives him the part of the poem, and Socrates says, yeah, I know poetry. I'm not an ignorant man. I'm very familiar with it. Well, Protagoras asks him some complicated question about what Simonides says about virtue. Now, the point is here that of all the kinds of knowledge, or of all the discourses that have any claim towards being knowledge at all, literary criticism is the mushiest. Right? Because you like this, I like that. There are 19 different ways of viewing the same poem or the same literary construct. And it's hard to say which is the best. There's the one you like and there's the one he likes. But how to hierarchically organize them, or how to unify all the various and sometimes contradictory interpretations of a piece of poetry, totally impossible. And that's what Protagoras likes. He says, let's talk about literary criticism. Let's talk about mushy stuff. He's going to drag Socrates into the intellectual quicksand and drown him. Right? Because that's where Protagoras has his great advantage. Socrates knows the deal, though. You don't put anything over on Socrates. He says, okay, you want to talk about Simonides? Well, Socrates gives an elaborate and highly ironic diatribe about this piece of poetry. And he gives 3 different interpretations, all of which are contradictory, all of which are incoherent, and all of which are brilliant. In other words, Socrates creates a sort of parody of literary criticism. And I mean, some of the interpretations are so wild and far-fetched that they're absolutely funny. In other words, I laughed out loud reading this, particularly those passages. For example, Spartans are often thought to be coarse, crude, uncultivated men? Nay, says Socrates. This poem suggests to us that the real reason why the Spartans have done so well in war is because they have deluded all the other Greeks into thinking that the Spartans get their prowess by constant military training and by constantly engaging in physical exercise. No. The Spartans have fooled everyone else into wearing short cloaks and engaging in boxing and wrestling to make themselves tough. That's not the way the Spartans became the masters of all of Greece. Nay. Whenever the Spartans want to consult their philosophers, because the Spartans are a very philosophical people, and of course everyone knows that the Spartans are the least philosophical, the crudest people in Greece. They're so philosophical and so subtle that they drive out all foreigners from their city, and then they consult with their wise men, engage in the dialectic, and that's how they manage to win all their battles and become the bravest and most virtuous men in all of Greece. Well, of course, no one believes that, and it's the broadest kind of parody of not only of the Spartans and of this kind of discussion, but of the whole practice of literary criticism altogether. He says, look, if you don't want to focus your thinking on any particular thing, and you just want to jump into the intellectual mush, what you get is incoherence upon incoherence, and it leads nowhere. This is a waste of time. I gave you 3 interpretations, all of which are contradictory, and all of which are really good. Now, there's no need for you to give us a 4th or a 5th. There's no point in this. This doesn't tell us anything about virtue. We don't learn anything about virtue by appeals to authority. We learn about virtue by using our heads. So after he gives this, Socrates says, well, now I've given you my interpretations, and I'd like to move away from this now, because this is a waste of time, actually. This reminds me of second-rate discussions among second-rate men, going after the pride of Protagoras and all the others. He says, what I'd really like to see is more thinking and less talking. How about that? And the way we would do that is by engaging in the dialectic. Would you be willing to do that? And Protagoras doesn't say anything. Right? He doesn't want to get involved. He doesn't want to say yes. He doesn't want to say no. He wants to weasel out and can't figure out how to do it. As soon as, in all the dialogues, as soon as the sophist stops talking and doesn't want to talk anymore, it always shows that he knows the argument is busted. He's lost. But it'll be another few minutes before everybody else manages to catch up, because the sophist is smarter than most men. Well, Alcibiades comes through again. He says, do you approve of the way he's behaving? I mean, let him say that he doesn't want to engage in the argument. He wants to give it up, and he's going to go back on his former agreement, if that's what he wants to do. But if he doesn't, then answer the question. So Alcibiades, again, prods him along, and Protagoras says, okay, I'll answer questions. Come on. bring it on. And Socrates, of course, like a hound, back onto the scent. He says, good, I want to talk about the unity of the virtues. So he's forgotten nothing. This little interlude has been meaningless. We haven't found out anything about virtue. We're talking about Simonides. And he talks about a number of things. First of all, he says, now give me a straight answer. You can change, because you've been changing all the time. It's all relative and it's all messy. Give me your answer this time. Are the virtues a unity? And now, Protagoras changes the answer he gave in the beginning. He says, well, I'd say they all have kind of a general resemblance, which is as close as you're going to get to Protagoras saying, yes, they're a unity, right? Kind of, sort of a general resemblance in a way, which is like saying, well, I think that 2 and 2 is sort of like 4 in a sense. In other words, you can't qualify this. It either is or is not a unity. Socrates wants to know some definite answer. And he says, with one exception, I think that it's probably true that courage is not part of the unity of the other virtues. I can see how wisdom or moderation would be part of one unified thing, virtue, but I've seen many evil, ignorant, foolish men who are courageous. And of course, that little exposed area where courage is left out of the argument is just what Socrates is going to jump on, and that's where he's going to win the argument. So he goes around the long way. He says, okay, let's investigate that. First of all, he wants to find out about the connection between pleasure and the good. He asks Protagoras, do you think that the good and pleasure are the same thing? Protagoras says, no. I mean, the many do, the mob do, but I myself do not, which is the smart move, because he's tailoring his answers to Socrates. He knows that Socrates is going to want a very moralistic kind of reasoning, and he's not going to go for the idea that the pleasure and the good are the same thing. And then Socrates asks him about hedonism. He says, even though the many do believe that pleasure and the good are the same thing, you wise men, you and I, or Protagoras and I don't believe that, but the many do. At the same time, these hedonistic people, these people who think that pleasure and the good are the same thing, they also believe in akrasia, which is weakness of the will. And Socrates says, you know what they hold the view that sometimes a person is overmastered by the desire for an immediate pleasure, and the weakness of the will lets them do what they know is wrong. And then Socrates goes around and shows that hedonism, the idea that pleasure is the good, is logically incompatible with akrasia. What that means is that any time that for people that hold that pleasure is the same thing as the good, weakness of the will is impossible. It just means that you want this good thing. It doesn't mean that you can be overpowered by the will. There's an internal inconsistency between akrasia and hedonism. So once he establishes that, then he goes back and looks at hedonism again. Now, within the first time that he gets Protagoras to agree that pleasure is not the good, the first time he gets him to agree that pleasure is not the good, Protagoras says, yes, I'll side with you. When he goes that pleasure is the good, he brings in the other two sophists. Why? Because once we find out that it's not a question of weakness of the will, that in fact becoming overmastered by pleasure is just a kind of ignorance, you don't know what true pleasure is, that means that there's something to teach, and that means that all the sophists now have a function. They can teach people what the true pleasures are. So all three sophists chime in towards the end, like Larry, Moe, and Curly, say, yeah, we agree with you, Socrates. Pleasure probably is the good, or it isn't the good. We don't really know which it is. We don't care which it is. We're incoherent, and we are not committed to any kind of logical order to our discussion. All we want is a good reason to have people give us money for whatever teaching we give. We don't know what our teaching exactly is, and it'll change if it is advantageous to it, but the point is that money is what it's all about for these people. And in addition, there's a kind of professional rivalry between the sophists that shouldn't be overlooked. So when they're all in the same room, they're all looking to develop their own eminence. And at the beginning of his discussion, Protagoras had shot a very telling look at Hippias, saying, I just teach one thing because I know how to speak, whereas Hippias teaches a great many things. He's a smart guy, in a certain way. Now, Hippias and Protagoras both see that Socrates is going to win the argument, because once we've shown that hedonism is incompatible with akrasia, with weakness of the will, then we have to go back to the original argument made by Protagoras about courage being separate from the other virtues. He says, look, if you were right in saying that many evil, ignorant men are courageous and brave, and if it's true that akrasia, or weakness of the will, is the same thing as ignorance, then it follows that self-control is knowledge. And if self-control is knowledge, the controlled man is the knowing man, and the controlled man is also the brave man. He goes out and meets danger. It's the fearful man, the cowardly man, that's the ignorant man. So that means that you were wrong in saying that ignorant, evil men are brave. Actually, it's knowing, wise men that are brave, and he flips them and just pins them. And here's where the other two sophists stand out of the way, because they want to see their great rival, Protagoras, taken down. So there's no honor among these guys, and they're not interested in the real truth of any matter of morals or logic. They're interested in making money, they are mercenary, they are incoherent, and they are not social animals. They have no unity amongst themselves or within themselves. This is the drive towards plurality. They're happy to see one of their own taken down a peg so that they can move up. Little do they know that Socrates could do as easy a job, well, I mean, there are dialogues called the Hippias, in which he would have no more problem taking them on and showing them to be incoherent than he had with Protagoras, the greatest of the bunch. So it turns out then that at the end of the dialogue, and it's a beautiful, witty, comic dialogue, that we've demonstrated to the satisfaction of Socrates anyway, the unity of the virtues. All of virtue is one thing. Wisdom, courage, moderation, and justice, the whole great set of Platonic virtues, are one unified thing, knowledge. And ignorance, correspondingly, is vice. And at the end of it, Protagoras shows a little magnanimity. That's one of the nice things about Protagoras. He says, you know, I predict that you have a great future in philosophy. That you're a real smart guy, and you'll be one of the great teachers of Greece one of these days. Now, I'm a little tired. It's time for you to go home. You know, get out of here, in other words. Leave me alone. I've had enough of a beating for today. The point is, now, that Socrates has found the unity of the virtues and shown that dialectic is superior to rhetoric. This gives him a chance to not only organize the discussions in hell, but dialectic leads us out of Hades, out of the realm of dead souls, back out into the light again. And of course we know what the sunlight is from the Republic. So up we go and out we go through the use of dialectic over rhetoric. By finding something definite to fix our thinking upon, what we get as a result is true knowledge, and this true knowledge gives us moral wisdom, and moral wisdom is what dialectic is all about.
All right, I couldn't fix my camera, so I'll talk a little bit about it. If anyone wants to come on in, you can. So I thought that was a great little review, I guess you could say, lecture on the Protagoras part of the dialogues from Plato, and it's funny. Well, not so funny, really. But if you put it in a context of, are there sophists today, and who are the sophists? Now the thing is, you're gonna see like almost everybody that's high in well regard are sophists, and I mean, just think about it. It's they don't want to engage in conversation. They're not social animals. They want the appearance of it. Just think of any mainstream journalist, or maybe even some alt journalists, or some just reporters, someone who's just on in mainstream or alt streams where they've got upwards of 20 to 50 to maybe even millions of subscribers and views. They're not going to talk to any just person. They're going to be like, oh, so how many subscribers you got? How many views? Who are your sponsors? And all of that stuff. Again, it's probably more about the money that they get, because I mean, it's just, for them, it's just a waste of time. Who wants to watch someone having a conversation with Joe Schmo, right? Like, there's no point in it, unless the point in it is to make the Joe Schmo look like an idiot or something like that, and have all the people who are your fans just laugh. But do they engage in just looking for the truth? You know, like, if we can apply it to almost anything, maybe just think of all the martial arts that have been out there for a couple of decades, and you'll see, oh, my martial arts is the best, my school's the best, we've got the most students, we've been all around, we've got different schools and all these different countries, and we got our grandmaster who's been teaching for like 60 years. He's like 90 years old, and he could still beat every one of us. And he's got this magic death touch and all this other jazz. Like, hey, can we see this magic death touch? And they'll be like, I'm sorry. We don't want anyone to die, but we do have some of his students who are masters who can take the magic death touch and survive. All right. Hey, how's it going? Now, can you say something? I don't hear anything from you.
Hey, Bon, can you hear me?
Yep, I can hear you now.
Okay, cool.
So what are your thoughts, Sophists of today? Can you give some examples? Do you think there are some, or do you think there's just a lot more Sophists than there were in the past in ancient Greek, as far as what the written history is telling us?
There was, between the two videos you played, almost an hour, and I haven't done any research into sophistry, except I've heard the word, looked it up, and it was like a couple years ago, and realized that, yeah, it was something, and now I'll make it very short, but you can correct me or give me your knowledge, what you think about it. Is it's almost like a not just a belief, but a teaching of belief based upon a false premise of some sort, whether it's authority or so I can't say that I've looked into it. Like, I don't know the definition of it. What would you say sophistry is? If there was a sophist, give a topic and like what would they say versus reality?
Okay, so you've got individuals who are looking for the truth, and I think Tom Richey had a good point when he says, look, the person who's like a Platonist, they're going to look for the truth. They don't know where it is, but in order to find it, they have to look for it. Now you've got a sophist where it's like, look, nobody knows the truth. People are looking for it and they really haven't found it. But here's what it is. I could say I have the truth, and I could have people pay for it to get the truth. And who's going to find out if I'm right or wrong? No one else knows. So that's the sophist in a way. They're taking advantage of what no one else really knows because no one has figured it out yet. And they say, I've got the answer. And if you want to know the answer, well, you're going to have to join my club. Club is $100 per month or whatever, whatever the fee is to join. I mean, we're going to see a little bit more of this when we get into the mystery schools in Protagoras, where basically he handpicked people who came in. When he gave his lectures, he was always behind a curtain and all this other stuff. And basically, he's got the answers. And he's saying, hey, if you want the answers, you're going to have to join my school. But if you join my school, you're going to have to do a couple of these things.
Wear white robes.
Yeah. Have your martial arts belt. You got to start out as a white belt.
Everyone's got white hair also for some reason.
Yeah. You want to go to the next level, you got to pay for it. You get your yellow belt. Here's congratulations. Now you can learn the next level of the truth. And
so, Ivan, could I, because your explanation there just really triggered me on a mind thought. And so sophistry could almost be considered consensus.
Yeah,
right.
In some way, I mean, the best sophist is going to be the one who has the most people who believes in what that person believes, or at least maybe that person doesn't believe it, but gets them to believe what this person says.
So a sophist is let's say one thought or one man. Let's say one man with one thought.
An individual.
Yeah, an individual. But sophistry could be the collection of others that latch on to that thought blindly, almost just because, well, we don't want to think about it, so this has to be real. Right? This is the truth, because I mean, this guy says that he's wearing a white robe.
Yeah, this person's got hundreds of thousands of followers, and hundreds of thousands of followers can't be wrong. And and then they look at Socrates and Plato is like, man, there's only two Platonists. What do they know? Right? It's like what? It's like the Karate Kid. It's like, so Mr. Miyagi trains Daniel, and I mean, at least it's one-on-one, and Daniel gets a good, all the teachings that Mr. Miyagi can give, because Mr. Miyagi could give him full instructions and training. But then you've got the other guy, Cobra Kai. He's training 20, 30 students, right? And he can't train all of them with all his time. He has to just pick the best one out of them. And, when he needs to go take a break, he tells his best student to take over. And basically he has a better odds of winning a tournament. If you've got a tournament of 50 people and you've got a school with 30 people participating, and you've got one school with one person participating, and you're going to say, okay, we'll see, the better school is the one who wins this tournament. You're going to have better odds with 30 people in it out of 50 than 1 out of 50. So it's kind of like that, where most people think, oh, well, obviously Cobra Kai's going to win. They got a lot more people. One of them are going to be able to at least take out that one guy from that one school, type of thing.
All I know from that example, which is very good, is somebody's going to get kicked in the face, though. Right? So here comes reality into sophistry, right? And so it was a good example, but yeah, just in my mind, maybe I'm a little bit sophistry here. I'm just thinking about, the different ways of teaching there. Somebody's going to feel pain in reality. Somebody. I don't know who. But.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what you would call the followers of sophistry. I guess maybe that's what you just call them, followers of sophistry, or some people call them sheep or
sophists, right? Sophists.
But they're not the ones who are perpetrating this sophistry. They're just following along.
What do you think about repeaters? Like we are repeaters, or we have been. When we went through school. And we had a younger,
maybe like regurgitators type of thing.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like, hey, so explain to me how let's say chemistry works, right? Like we just pretty much regurgitate what we learned about chemistry. We don't necessarily know how all these atoms line up, and seeing the negative, you got the positive, negative, what am I thinking of?
Atoms, ions, molecules, combining, recombining, reactions.
I'm thinking the opposite of protons. You got protons, neutrons, and then electrons. Electrons. So yeah, it's just the electrons have to go and find another. I mean, they have to find another atom to combine with, and if all that other stuff, we regurgitate it. We can't see it in action, and we just put a couple of compounds or together and fire things up, heat things up, and then all of a sudden we get a result.
Iban, I know you're on the you know that like everything's backwards. Everything that maybe we've been told, everything's backwards. So even on that little small atom description you gave there, plus and minus, they attract. That's what the magnets do.
Mm-hmm.
You can't put two souths together. You can't put two norths together. And so how in the hell can we have a plus in the center of this atom and a bunch of ends, make minuses floating around, and they don't just attract each other? Like, how is this possible? You just sprung my mind there just thinking about that.
Well,
like
what's interesting is everything harpens back to ancient Greece. I mean, the whole idea of atoms was from, I think, one of the pre-Socratics. So back in like before 500 BC, 300 BC or something like that. I mean, most people don't know that. People would think, oh, yeah, the idea of the atoms and stuff, that was in probably like the 1700s or something like that. No. Think way before like 300 BC at least.
Yeah.
And it's fun revisiting all of this because now that I've just kind of looked at everything again, I'm just seeing how everything pertains to today. And it could be almost as if, imagine, so for the, you know how we have the Dark Ages? Imagine, maybe like the ancient Greek, you know how it could be like 2,500 years ago? It could have been 200 years ago, right? And basically we just had people make up a whole bunch of stories and things like that in history. It's like no one really knows.
Nobody really knows. And if we want to be, how would you call that if you believe a story, maybe literal, literal. What if we right now are in the Dark Ages, right? It was a story that we heard, like, oh yeah, that would never pertain to us. Oh no, we're totally advanced, we're smart, we got all this shit. But what if like that story is actually representing us today? We would never know, but it kind of seems like it once you and I realize that, whoa, there's another story out there, a different story, information, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's why we call this time of our life, you and me, certain folks call it enlightening or awakening or something.
Yeah, I mean, it could just be another Dark Age coming. I mean, it's just a transition of putting out new stories because I think of it this way. It's like people who wake up, figure things out, right? They can't do anything about those people. But you know what they can do? Once those people are gone, is you can fix up all these holes in the history, in all these stories, and all these things that should line up correctly. You just fix them up. It's like me being a quality assurance engineer in most of my life. Is we find the bugs, we tell them these are the things that are wrong with your product, and now they know what they need to go and fix. So in some ways, if you want to call this the second Dark Age or the one of the many Dark Ages that have happened, maybe that's the point, is they don't attempt to bring us back when we're too far gone, right? They just go, okay, they're too far gone. But now, right, we've got the internet, people like Ebon here, they're exposing all the stuff that like doesn't make sense or that's obvious fakery. It's like, okay, we'll patch that up for next go around.
Yeah, and back to the story thing, exactly. Back to the story thing, it's like right now, here and now, in your present and my present, we are talking. I mean, I think we can verify that. I can come shake your hand. But all the information we get is in a writing. The author is dead. There's no chain of command, like who wrote it. Like there's a story about who wrote that story. There's like another story for another story. And like there's no way for me and you to actually verify, to go back in history. And we can't go in the future either. We're stuck right here with the limited information we have, even though it's gotten better in the past 10 years, meaning they've provided us more Wikipedias and, the internet and also speaking with other people.
Yep. I think you're going to find the next segment, and I think I need to restart my computer before the next one because my camera's not working. But this next lecture by Professor Sugrue, it's about an hour and a half. But what he pretty much puts all of the stuff that he lectures about in the dialogue, and just relays it to people. And the great thing about it is it's pretty much saying there's a reason why Socrates didn't write any of his accounts down. I mean, Socrates is a pretty smart fellow. You would figure it out. If he wanted to write something, he would have wrote it down. But instead, we've got his student, Plato, who ends up writing everything. And And Professor Sugrue says the reason for it is because we're not supposed to really rely on the one book and just figure things out just by the book, just like people who are doing with the different Bibles. Socrates, if that was the way to get things, to find out things, he would just have gone to a mountain, secluded himself, and figured things out on his own. But that wasn't the point. The point is that he kept going around and around to other people and try to figure out what's going on. Like when you come on here, you've got all these contradictions that you've seen from your waking process, right? I mean, I've talked to you before. I've heard you talk about it. Same thing with the contradictions I see. And now we've seen all these contradictions, and we go, okay, let's try to figure this out. But we can't really do it on our own. We kind of have to like pass questions and answers back and forth. It's like, let me put this to you, Aaron. How about, that type of thing?
Yeah, and you're exactly right. It's like we can't do it on our own because the topics we're talking about is basically like how we got here today at this point. Like, how did we get here? And it's information. That's how we got here. So I'm talking to Ebon Kim right now. He's talking to Aaron Moorfeld, and we have similar thinking about our present time. How did we get here? And you and I both think or have researched back to say, read what we've read, and to either believe it or not. And regardless, we're both here right now. But it's like when Socrates, one of the greatest teachers, was not a writer, but yet his student wrote everything down, and then of course became this famous writing. It just reinforces in our, you and me's childhood, where we learn this story, maybe high school, middle school, that you don't question the teacher. We copy the teacher, right? We sit there in class on our desk and we write down everything teacher says. We just write it down. We write down everything teacher says. And they're just up there talking. And then they erase the blackboard, right? They erase it after they're done with their presentation.
That's a good introspective. Yeah, I like that.
Yeah.
One of the other things that I think it's on the next presentation too is, pardon me, excuse me, is being a sophist. You just tell a story or in a poetic form or something, right? And how he in the Michael Sugrue's the professor's presentation we just went through, he talks about how the sophist would talk about how great democracy is, and he tells a little bit a story about that. But then if he goes to the next country and it's an oligarchy, he tells about a story of how great oligarchy is. So basically, there's all these stories littered around. Anyone can pick any one of these stories, all these books, whatever, and just pick the one that they like. It's like pick which flavor of ice cream you like. People will just focus on that, and then they'll ignore everything else.
Absolutely. One-track mind. I find myself doing that too. Even though let's just create a term for you and me, awake or whatever it is. And I'm always observant. I watch people. I just watch life and just think about all that. But I do find myself just one tracking. And then I think back, like in my high school years or back then, like one track. There was never any outside, never looking out, never questioning anything,
Mm-hmm.
But I still find myself doing that today. Just as our mind works, you get caught in a, but just not for very long, like 10 minutes. Like,
I mean, it's easy to think back when we're, say 16, 17. I mean, just think of all the things we were focused on. Finish school, try to get good grades on a SAT or ACT, get into a good college, find a job, try to, if your grades are good, try to get a scholarship, Or if you're into sports, try to get into school with a good sports program. You know,
Yeah,
that type
but
of stuff.
we still had no focus on like a career, right? We were still just pushed though on those exactly what you just said. You gotta try or get good grades so you could get into uni, whether paid for or you know scholarship or not. But we never remember we weren't focused on a career yet.
Yep.
You at least I don't know if you knew what you wanted to do in 10th grade. You know, I didn't.
Yeah, I wasn't sure. I was thinking of going to the forestry or being like one of those national geographic photographers or videographers. Or animal behaviors. It was that kind of stuff. I wasn't really caring about like the money. And then when after I got out of the I dropped out of university, went to the military, got out of the military. It's like, well, I don't know what to do. and then when I said, there's at one point where things started happening. I go, okay, next 5 years, I'm just going to focus on making money. And all I did was, guess what? I made lots of money.
Yeah.
And then I was like, well, after a while, I was like, well, is this it? I mean, just, just make money.
Wait. Exactly. Right? Is that it? I mean, it's part of it. The money is a representation of your labor and your knowledge and what you've created so far in your life. So I'm not discounting the fact that you make money. But at some point, yeah, like you just said, you're like, okay, so this is what I've become. Like, that's it? What else do I do? What why wouldn't you, a guy like you, pursue interests that you love? I mean, how much more valuable to society do you think you could be? Or not to society, but to guys like me or just normal folks, not to the government, but you know, to us. If you pursued everything that you love, you know, you could have YouTube vids on just very, very informative things about things you love. You're still doing well because I'm on here and I think it's very informative. But you kind of follow my path there.
Yeah, I'll probably just be, you know how I like in the spring, there's 3 American robins that just nest in front of our house and just taking pictures and videos and live streaming that. I like doing that. I like going fishing. If I get to go any place that looks different than just rural America, then I'll I'll take pictures and videos and usually I share them with like family and friends, but you know, I'll share them with the public and just things like that, you know. It doesn't take much, at least for me.
The only people who don't think that nature is interesting are those that are trapped in the city. You know, they're debt ridden. They have to live in the city. That's where they owe their rent, they owe their debt. That's where they make their money, and they have to pay it right back into the city, and they cannot get out of that city trap. And that's why it's called a city. It's where you sit and you'll never stand up.
Yeah, I mean, I don't see many people leaving the city. I see most people going to the city.
Exactly. When nature provides all, but they think the city, those big, you know, iron buildings, they think that provides all. You know,
it's a convenience. It doesn't provide, but it is a convenient method of collecting what's been gathered, I guess you could say. I mean, because it all starts like here in Columbus, Nebraska, all these farms, it all starts here. Then it goes to all the places where they get processed and then transported, you know, and then they all go to the cities.
That's right. That's where all the banks are, you know. That's where.
Yeah.
If you're a farmer, like all those farmers, they don't need that city, right? I mean, if as long as you have food and water, I mean, that's how folks used to live forever, right?
Yeah.
Food, water, and maybe another person around you so you don't go crazy. Everything's fine.
Yeah, and more people was actually worse because they would just take up your resources, or maybe they would just be too greedy and just take everything from like a lake and something. It's like, hey, what are you doing? Why are you taking all the fish from the lake? We all need that fish. And they go, well, I'm selling and making a fortune over in the next town. They don't have a lake.
Ooh, no, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. That's, you kind of just describe the reason for what we would call a government. All right, so that the people don't own that lake. Now it's controlled by this entity.
Yeah, the government
So-
says, "Hey, it's okay. He's this corporation. He can take all the fish in your lake."
Mm.
And we're like,
Yeah,
"What?
they can
What?"
also do that. Yeah. Favors. Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So I want to keep going. If you want to come back, because I'm gonna start up a new stream after I restart my computer. Show this 90 minutes. It'll actually give us more talking points actually, and then go from there.
Yeah. Play the video. I'm off.
All right.
Don't
Oh,
worry.
yeah. So I'm gonna restart and end the stream. End the stream, then restart. Sorry. All right. Thanks, Aaron. And I'll see everybody in probably 30 minutes. It'll probably take me 30 minutes to get started up.
All right.
All right. Bye.
Sounds good, Ivan. All right. Have a good night. If we don't chat later, have a good night and all
Yep.
that stuff.
You too. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.